Hey church, we are back. I am back with my partners in crime, partners in radio or video for a conversation today, Pastor's Corner. So what we want to do with these videos is some of them we try to give teaching around how to follow Jesus in this world. But we also do these videos to give you an inside peek in the conversations that we've been having for a while and updates about the church. In this particular video, we just want to highlight a couple things about where we're at as a church, where we're going, and just some of these conversations. And so, as we start here, guys, I think one thing was clear to me is I am no prophet. Or have the gift of prophecy, but it did feel, to my impression, last year in 2022, that it was going to be an important year. It just seemed, people are getting their life together, coming out of COVID. As a church, we were recovering from that, figuring things out, kind of rebounding a bit as well, and finding our way. Also, one of the things and the conversations we've been having is about transition, particularly staff transitions. And we've been saying, hey, we're going to have this transition in 3 to 5 years. And we've been having that conversation for 3 to 5 years. Just some, I think, things happened that surprised us, challenged us, but also gave us a glimpse into God's faithfulness to us as a body, and we saw him work. And so, Dennis, from last year, can you just give us a little bit of the rundown of, what some of the challenges were, kind of what happened, and how this just led us to think about transition?
Well, are you talking about what finally triggered it this past year? Yeah, so I guess at the end of the day, finances triggered it, right? As you said, for 3 to 5 years, we've been talking about a 3 to 5 year transition plan, but it's always been just conversation because we weren't compelled to do anything. Even though as we look forward, we knew, I'm getting older, retirement is looming. We had Joanne who retired, last year. And so it was just clear that the reality of that transition was in front of us at some point. But it became easy to just talk about it. We didn't have to do anything. But last year, the finances actually forced us to address some of the things that have been just talked about up till then. And we hit, I guess it was June of last year, where we had our lowest giving month that I can recall.
And you've been here for a while.
I've been here for a while, so I do not recall a month that low. And then it was followed by several more months of below average giving, which made it obvious to all of us in leadership that we had to address the budget issue. We could not just continue with the budget that was put in place in the spring because the money wasn't there. And trying to be good stewards of it, we just had to begin to make changes. And those changes were, we had a number of areas that we focused on, but the one that impacts this conversation mostly was we rolled back salaries to the prior year's level. And I took a pay cut because I hadn't been taking increases the last few years. So I took a pay cut, which forced me on the personal level to realize I'm going to have to do something to start supplementing my income, which began to propel me down the road of transitions are happening now. Right? And so it was the financial piece that triggered it.
So for maybe those in the church who are a little bit newer, just a little bit of your background. You worked in a different field prior to being hired by LBC, right?
Right. Yeah, so I was an engineer for since I graduated college, so probably a good 25 years in engineering. And then came on staff 12 and a half years ago to meet a need that was there, and I had been doing a lot of work around the church because at that point I was in a consulting business, so I had a lot of flexibility in my time. And so the board at that point, because of the situation that was here and the vacancy that was here on staff, just asked me to step in and do that. And I did. So I stepped out of engineering and into pastoral
Quite the shift.
which is quite the shift. And that just became the life that I was living. It was a new career essentially for me. If you think of it in just vocational terms, it was a new career, and clearly the board was using that along with a bunch of other things to bring us to where we are now. And then yeah, brought me back to that this past.
Yeah, and I think that's an important piece in it, because I remember hearing you talk about these things as we're having these discussions and just wondering, is there a path back to something else?
Yeah.
And for a long time, it didn't seem as if there was for you, but God provided for you, right? In a fairly, almost miraculous-like way.
Yeah, I would agree with that miraculous, or just in a way that even I couldn't, they couldn't miss, right? The way he acted. So like I said, in June was our worst month ever. We made all of those giving wise, and we made all of those changes to my salary, which was not sustainable for me for the long run. So it forced me to begin to seriously look at what I've been thinking about for a while, because I'm not ready financially to retire. So I need to supplement my income. And simultaneously, in that whole thing, an opportunity came up to step back into engineering. And if you know anything at all about engineering, to be out of engineering for 12 years is an eternity. You don't just step back in, right? But the Lord opened this door, which I can't conceive of another way to do it, to step back into an engineering environment that was actually viable to me. And so no sooner did I say yes to that opportunity that we had our greatest giving month ever. I think it was like the week after I said yes to this position, that suddenly the Lord just turned around the financial picture of the church. And I think we put the salaries back. We made a couple of adjustments back to where we were, but it was clear that I had made a commitment, so I could not uncommit myself. And so I just looked at that whole turn of events as the Lord saying, it's time to do the transition that you've been talking about for the last 3 to 5 years. It's time to start that. And it's been a blessing. So that was back in November, I guess, is when that all took place. And it's been good. The Lord has clearly led me down that road and led this church into that transitional piece.
I think that's been just an important piece to remember too, is like, that this whole thing isn't being driven by finances, but is being guided by the Spirit, and I think that even though that was the thing that the Lord used to get our attention, and to sort of accelerate some of the conversations that we've been having, I think there's been a clear sense all along the way that the Lord is leading us through this process, even though it's uncomfortable, and even though, because any kind of change is uncomfortable and difficult, especially when it involves career change and livelihood, finances, and just things that have been comfortable operating modes, and so, but I think there's been a clear sense, among the elders that this is being guided by the Spirit of God, into the season of transition, even though not everything is totally clear or known. Some of these things, like with your role, have become very clear to us.
Yeah, and that's exactly the right framework to think about these things, is that the finances were the trigger to something that we knew had to happen all along. It wasn't the reason we did it. It was a trigger for actually acting on it. And the Lord is at work. And I know for me personally, it's just a really great comfort to step back at those points when you have the doubts, right? Doubts always creep in. When you have those doubts, you can stop and say, no, God is in this. It is so clear to me in so many different areas, not just the way this unfolded, but what's taken place between then and now, the condition of the church, and you just come on a Sunday morning, it's like vibrant and alive, and the Spirit is clearly moving in so many different ways, that in those times of uncertainty, in those times of second guessing, I can step back and say, no, God is behind this, and that's a great thing. Yeah. I don't know where else I would want to stand.
Yeah. And that's, one of the most encouraging things I think that we've seen, through this and how God is working. And in terms of your work life, people may have noticed at times in the services you've taken a step back because you are working 2 jobs now. And so you just have other responsibilities happening. We also have some transitioning happening with Linda Terciano, our family ministry director. She's been talking about that transition for a while now as well. And so can you just put a little, I guess, meat on the bones here of practicalities of, okay, as we're moving towards this for this coming year, what does that mean for your position? What does that mean for Linda's position?
Yeah, so I think Linda, and that's an important point to keep in this. It's not about me and my position. That's just one piece of all of the pieces that the Lord is moving, and a big part of it is just staff in general, right? And Linda's been a key part of this staff equation for a while. It's, you're here on a Sunday morning, you look down that hallway, that's Linda, right? At LBC Kids, which is such a core part of who we are and our identity, we talk about core identities as a family, that's a core part of it. And if you look at the growth of this church in numbers, anyway, using that metric, growth in the young family segment has been a big part of it. And LBC Kids is one of the reasons why that's been facilitated, right? So her position here has been hugely important over the last 5 or so years. I forget how long she's been here, but she's been in the same state as me. It's like, okay, this isn't going to go on forever. When do I begin to transition toward retirement? And the same thing this year, this past year with the finances has triggered her to make that same decision. Say, okay, I now have a timeline. Her timeline will take her to next June, not this coming June, but next June, where she'll be fully retired. And so it's a two-step process. She's going to step in this fiscal year, which runs from April 1st to March 31st, she'll drop to 75% of her salary and 75% of her time, right? So it'll give her a little bit more freedom, and it moves her one step closer toward that. And then by the time we get to June, which is a couple months into the next fiscal year, she'll step to 0. So that's her trajectory toward retiring and stepping off staff. It's 75% down to 0 over the next year plus, kind of a thing. And the same thing in terms of the workload. I think she's going to not come into the office on Fridays to sort of enforce that 75% rule, because ministry is sneaky that way. You don't take the time from you if you're not watching. So we'll enforce that schedule, so Fridays are off for her, and that'll give her the 75% break. And in the meantime, this year will be spent with her trying to make sure that ministry is healthy, whether we staff it again, whether we staff it differently, whether it's volunteer. That's all that they're all the things that need to be worked out over this next year, is figuring out how do we keep that ministry healthy and vibrant and growing, because it's a core part of the church, while we know this transition is happening. So that's her current path, and I think it's a good one. And I'm on a similar sort of trajectory. Although it's going to be a two-step thing. I go 75% April 1st. I'm going 50% come July 1st. And at that point, I'll probably do a similar sort of thing where I'll restrict my office hours to 1 less day a week, just to put that boundary in place. And then probably in the April 1st timeframe of next year, I'll go to 0. And during that time, same thing. We'll be figuring out how to shift the balance of the work, so that the two of you are able to manage what's coming and fill in behind you in places where you're not able to do the work anymore. And so the Lord's gracious that way. He's given us a year plus to work out those details. Now that we know we've got a stake in the ground saying, next spring, we're going to 0 in both of these positions.
Yeah, so I can imagine maybe some of the questions just coming up as people are hearing this, and from what we've seen with the finances, on one hand, we are doing well there. And so I guess it could be thought of as like, well, why not just continue funding both of these positions like we have been over the next year, if we have the funds?
Yeah, that's a legitimate question, and that's certainly an option. We could certainly do that, but speaking for me personally, I said yes to the position. There's no going back on that without me backing out of a commitment that I've made, right? So it's not really, for me, a viable option. But I think even more important than that, to go back to that position of, okay, we're just going to continue the way we are, is not the way the Lord is leading us. The Lord is leading us to transition, not to transition later, but now. And it's forcing us to have conversations and to make decisions that just need to be made. And so I think it's God orchestrating this, and we're just trying to follow and keep in step with Him as He leads.
Yeah. And another piece of this is eventually you'll be transitioning kind of back to a lay elder.
Mm-hmm.
And so you'll still be here.
Yeah.
Linda will also still be part of this church, right? You guys aren't going anywhere.
Exactly.
You're not getting fired,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, no one's being pushed out, no one's getting fired, no one's going anywhere unless the Lord changes that. But I know, I don't want to speak on Linda's behalf, but I know from conversations with her, she has the same heart that I have, which is, this is my church home. And whether I'm paid or not, I'm going to be using the giftedness and the resources that the Lord has given me the way I always have, to serve the body in whatever capacity. So we're both planning to be here and to serve where the Lord calls us to serve.
Yeah, I think it's just been very encouraging, very, just a great example, even to myself, to see you, to see Linda walking through this, as you're, down the path a little bit ways from us, but just to see the humility in you and just your attentiveness to the Lord, it is so, I'm just so thankful. I'm just so thankful for that, and it's just a great example, so, I appreciate that. But you're not the only one going through transition, as we mentioned. Turn my attention to you now, Dan. You're not.
This has been an enjoyable
Yes,
conversation.
now I get to listen.
to.
Yeah, you're not immune from this transition conversation either. And so we have been talking about your position. Can you just, I guess, give people a little bit of history or overview of your arrangement currently, and then where we're seeing the Lord take your position here at the church?
Yeah, so my position when I started in 2009 is a position with a campus ministry organization called the CCO. And I guess folks who are newer to the church, may not even be as familiar with that dynamic, but I'm still technically employed by that campus ministry organization. And how that works is that I raise my salary, financial support, and the church is in essence the largest financial supporter. The way the partnership between the church and the campus ministry work is to be able to have a campus staff person placed on a campus in partnership with the local church. And so the
So
church
it's kind of a missionary model almost, right?
Yeah. And so the value for the local church is embedded in the DNA of how the CCO does campus ministry. And so for the last 14 years, that's what I've been doing, and many of the church members, personally support Emily and I in this work as we reach out to students. And over the years, what's happened is just more and more pastoral responsibility. A number of years ago, I came on to serve on the elder team, and took on more preaching over the years. And so I think for most people, while they know I do campus ministry, they don't necessarily always know that this is the setup for my position. But in terms of my day-to-day, week-to-week focus, my primary attention is on the mission to reach college students, and so I have responsibilities with the campus ministry organization to raise, to support raising, to trips and experiences we do with students. That's all part of what I do, and so all my other church kind of based work is built in and fit around and work through that. It's like, I think it's any good marriage. It's 100% effort, both ways on both parts. And I feel like that's kind of how I've treated it. It's 100% effort to reaching college students with my whole heart. But it's also 100% effort to love, this church with everything I've got, and all the time in between. But Lord willing, the plan is to make a transition from full-time CCO staff, where I'm raising support, by next May, June, somewhere in that time frame, as we're talking about that transition to full-time pastoral staff, where both my salary is coming from the church, but also my job description will change a bit, where we're still going to be committed to doing campus ministry in some of the ways that we're doing transitions that will be involved there, but my focus will become even more so oriented towards the discipleship of the whole church. And so, it's interesting to think about, because I think on the ground, maybe a lot, hopefully it won't feel like this massive jolt and change, because so much has been happening along the way. But I do feel like I look forward to that transition with a good degree of hope, because I'm excited about the future for this church. I think we have a really bright future. I think God's got a lot in store for us. And so I'm excited to be able to step into that. Even though there's a lot of unknown for me personally. When I think about, been doing campus ministry for 14 years, is what I've been doing since college, and as soon as I finished college, and so that's going to be a big change and adjustment for me, for a family too. So.
Yeah. I mean, it's a big change, but I think it's a good thing. And I think that there's sort of two pieces kind of in here, which admittedly, right, we don't have firm answers on certain things, and we're trying to wait on the Lord and seek that path. But in terms of campus ministry. What are your hopes, or what are you excited about, in terms of kind of taking a step over, not really back, but over that? And then what are you excited about, or where have just been some of your initial heart passions for the discipleship of the whole church?
Yeah, so I think for me, my calling to this area and to this church community has been a settled conviction and certainty, since I was in college. There's been no question about that. And, even though that particular expression has been campus ministry for the last 14 years, there's always been a sense that I'm not going anywhere. God's called me to this church, to this community. And so that has been, really grounding through all of these kind of conversations. But I think that God's calling me in a particular way to do at least three things, kind of above all else: disciple, lead, and preach. And so when I think about the church in the future, I think that one of the things I'm most excited about is to continue to invest in the discipleship of this church body, and men and women in particular. I think there's a lot of potential and room for growth within all of our adult ministry in the church. I think that that's something that needs, some more direct attention, and so I'm super excited about some of the potential for that. I've started to take over oversight this year with community groups, but as I look into the future, the next several years for the church, I think it's a really critical time for us to continue to cultivate healthy, thriving, robust community groups for the life of the church, where life-on-life discipleship can happen, within and an extension of those groups. And so those are two things in the short term I'm excited about. But I think bigger picture, I'm just excited to be thinking, when I think about ministry initiatives and the kinds of things that we do with students, and leadership and transformative opportunities, and all of the things that we are so intentional about with that, I'm excited to kind of bring a sort of focus and weight to bear, with the whole church in mind, as sort of my primary source of attention. And I'm excited about campus ministry. There's still a lot that we don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but I do know that college students continue to be the most reachable and sendable people on the planet. And so I think it's the most strategic investment that we can make in, reaching people for Christ. And this generation that's coming up is an amazing generation. And so, I don't see in any part of this transition that we take the kind of let off the pedal in any way, but that we continue to run hard after that. And so I'm excited just even some of the steps we've already begun to take for this whole church to be able to reach the whole campus. And it takes everybody to do that. And so I'm excited to kind of get a little bit over that. And I don't imagine being away from students in entirety in any regard. I'll always love college students uniquely, I think. But I'm excited to be able to help reach college students with the whole church in a more pronounced way, I guess.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, well, I know, like, for myself, just with all of this, it is a bit intimidating, for sure, but it is exciting for me. I'm excited, Dan, it's just been a long time that we've always co-labored side by side. I think, really, like, when we were both doing college ministry together was when we were most closely, doing that, and I think we'll get more opportunity to do that in the future, so I'm super excited about that. And, I am very, excited that we still have Dennis around, and that we can glean your wisdom and your guidance, and that you're there as someone who is just an encourager, to us. And I just am so thankful, because you hear stories sometimes with change and leadership change in churches of it not going well. And I'm just so thankful for, again, how God has been working through us, in us. We've been able to have really hard conversations, and yet I think He's binding us together in even deeper love, deeper unity, and He's on the move. And so I'm super thankful for that.
And I think there's boldness that comes out of it, right? Because as you see God moving, as we talked about earlier, that whenever you hit those points of doubt, or whether it's hitting those points where you realize how difficult this is going to be, you can step back into, this is God leading us. And so it gives you a certain level of boldness, not just for what's in front of us, immediately as we talk about transitions and all of the particulars of that. But as we look down the road at the challenges we don't even know exist, that's where the Lord is taking us. And so you can go into that, hard and fast, straight up the middle and not fear, because it's God who's leading, God who's providing. He has provided all along the way, whether you talk financially, whether you talk staff-wise, whether you talk, resources of any sort. God has given us exactly what we need to do what He's called us to do. And this place is bearing fruit, and I expect that He's going to continue to do that. And we're going to see great things over these next years. So we go boldly.
Awesome. Well, hey, church, some of this information might be, you may have heard it before. We did present this in a members meeting a while ago, but we did want to present it again. So this might be new information for some of you. And we would just ask you, we want you to be part of this journey with us. So if you're concerned about anything or you have questions about anything, please come talk to us. We're probably the most in the know in these things. But yeah, this is a very, it is very much a journey, because there are some things like we just don't know yet. But as we go, we'll find out more information, and we'll just keep dispensing that to you really as soon as we come to know these things. And we just want everyone in the church to know what's going on, to be part of the conversation, and to journey with us as we follow Christ through these transitions. And so again, please feel free to reach out. You know where to find us. You can always grab us on a Sunday and have a chat, and we'd love to continue the conversation with you. Thank you.